Hey everyone, welcome to today's workshop. Super excited to be joined by Enzo from June. Hey Enzo.
Hey,
Uh,
Stuart.
we will get going in just a couple of minutes. We'll give folks another minute or so to filter in here, but super excited to be talking about how to use product data to activate and retain customers in HubSpot. And
Exciting about this one.
yeah, for
Thanks for
sure.
having me.
As you're joining, everybody, let us know in the chat. Looks like folks already jumping in with where they're joining from. Hey, Christy, also in New Jersey. Yeah, let us know in the chat where you're joining from. If there's anything specific that you want to see covered, let us know there. We have Kim, Daniel, and Sherelle from the Arrows team will be hanging out in the chat, so we can answer any questions there. And we will have plenty of time at the end as well for questions. So we'll make sure that we answer everything that's noted there in the chat. So let's maybe one more minute, and then we'll dive right into this. We have a couple of questions that we'll ask in just a second. You can post your answers to those questions in the chat. Super helpful for us to sort of make sure that we're speaking to the right things that you want to hear. We appreciate you spending your time for an hour with us here today. So want to make sure that it's valuable for you and you get the most out of it. So Enzo, let's kick this off. So we're here today to talk about how to use product data to activate and retain customers in HubSpot. We're going to cover some really quick intros, some sort of foundational, what, why, and how around product usage data. Maybe you're already using product usage data. Maybe using it to activate and retain customers is new. We're going to sort of cover the foundation, and then we're going to get into sort of how to apply product usage data across the customer lifecycle, specifically with activation and retention. And then we have Q&A at the end. So as I mentioned, if you have any questions that come up throughout the session, leave them in the chat. We will get to them and make sure that we cover them there. And reminder as well, when you leave this session, you're going to get a couple of automated workflows for using product data in HubSpot that you could steal, step-by-step sort of how-to walkthroughs of setting those up, some common pitfalls to avoid if you're implementing product usage data in HubSpot. And of course, the most important thing, the biggest question we always get, this is being recorded. You'll get the recording after the session. So who are we? And I'm going to stop talking in just a second because I'm really excited to be joined today by Enzo Avigo, who is the CEO of June.so, which is a product analytics tool, which is sort of taking a unique and very new and interesting approach to product analytics for companies. Welcome, Enzo. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Stuart. And I love these little animations that you're playing. I have no clue how you do that.
Awesome. Can you give sort of the 30 seconds, like what is June, like why is now, or why are you a great person to be talking to about product usage data and like the impact that can have on or for teams?
Right. Yeah. So I'm actually really excited about this topic because I literally discovered it, I would say 2 years ago. So I'm a former product manager. I mostly worked in B2Cs, and my last job was actually at Intercom, a B2B SaaS scale up. And back then, what I realized is that actually product usage data could be useful for the CRM for success and sales use cases. And so when we started this company, June, which is a plug and play product analytics for B2B SaaS, one of the first things that was asked by our customers was, "Can you help us achieve that?" And so yeah, we just basically drill into this topic and build some expertise. And today I'm like super happy to share some of this expertise back with people that probably struggle with this topic. So that's the short story.
Awesome. Well, let's get into, you mentioned that sort of 3 years ago you went pretty deep on, or started going pretty deep on this topic. I'm curious for folks who are joining us, if you can answer this sort of in the chat, just respond with a number here. Really curious to hear sort of where you are at in the journey. So are you already tracking any product data in HubSpot? If you're using HubSpot CRM, do you already have product data flowing in? That could be things like, usage data, what are specific users doing? It could be sort of more company or account level data about subscriptions or upgrades or like things like that. But are you currently tracking any product data inside of HubSpot? So that's question number one. So yes, a little, yes, only a little, or sorry, yes, a lot, yes, only a little, no, but it's something that we're thinking about, or no, but curious as to how it goes. And then the second question, sort of a follow-up there, like, why are you interested in using product data in HubSpot? We're going to get into lots of different use cases for product usage data in HubSpot today, but are you specifically interested in it for customer success, marketing automation, customer service, everything, or something totally different? We'd love to hear sort of in the chat how you're thinking about it, if there's a particular area that you're focused on. So with that said, let's dive into it. Feel free to keep leaving responses in the chat. Daniel, Kim, and Sherelle will jump in there and make notes so we can sort of keep going here. But let's dive into the workshop itself. So the first thing that I want to talk about, and sort of to set the stage for everything else here around how to activate and retain customers with product usage data in HubSpot, is the impact of product usage data across the customer lifecycle. We have this sort of flywheel here. You can start sort of any point here, marketing, the product, sales, success, all these different functions that are interacting with customers, that are potentially generating data or seeing data that is being generated from the product, and the different ways that they can apply that data to improve their own work, their own functions. That might be upsells for sales and success. It might be retaining customers if you're in customer success, or it could be something like bringing in new leads or onboarding and activating new customers. Depending, as we'll talk about in this session, depending on the type of business that you're running, the type of sort of go-to-market, the type of product motion that you have, you might be doing each of these things in very different ways and using product data to sort of power that, or have the option to use product data to power these different outcomes ultimately in different ways. But I think important to note that product usage data can be generated throughout the customer life cycle, sort of is generated throughout the customer life cycle, and can be sort of pretty broadly applied to solve for very specific challenges, very specific touch points, very specific life cycle moments throughout that journey. So I'm going to hand this over to Enzo for a little bit here, really get into sort of building the foundation of product usage data. Like what is product usage data, and how do you think about sort of breaking down how to track it and how to start thinking about making it useful to your own teams?
Awesome. Yes. So this is the most technical slide you will see today. We were wondering if we should have that, and the answer was it's going to be hard to move forward if we don't. So I'll try to make data very, very simple. Basically, when you think about product analytics, there are really two main concepts you need to understand. On the one hand, you need to understand who the person is, and on the other hand, you need to understand what is the person doing. So on the left side, what you see is what is called generally an identify call, which is basically a line of code that you put on your sign up or your login flow that gets triggered when the person logs in or sign up. And this is going to basically send to your code base every time someone does something, who the person is. It's a one-time implementation that an engineer, product engineer needs to do. It's not very complex. They've been around for basically forever. Most of the product analytics out there, they share the same approach. But you need to know that without that, you can't differentiate people A from person B. And so you can't do any of the things we're going to see further down the line. So the minimum information you want to pass is an identifier, so a number, and then usually a first name, last name, or an email. If you're in a regulated industry, sometimes you're not going to pass this personal information, but for most companies, you're able to do it. On the right hand, what you see is called a track event, or a track event is usually the main name people use, and it's actually what the person has been doing. So here, it's also a line of code, which is actually triggered when the line of code get executed for the specific portion of your app. So in that case, it's a sign up event that people triggered, and the person is actually billed at Editech. So once you know that, we can move to one next slide, Stuart. And The next slide is actually how you group these people. So I told you there are two concepts in analytics. I lied, there actually are three. The next one is grouping people into the companies. When you think about B2B and using a CRM, then most of the time users belong to they belong to an organization. And for that, you need to do an extra line of code, which is called a group identify, which is identical to the user identify, but actually aggregates people under one roof, which is the name of your company. So in that case, the person belongs to the company called Acme. And that's how you can differentiate your users that belong to a company A versus a company B. And with that in mind, we're able to move forward and we'll see how we can map that to other concepts and leverage that. So once you have implemented this concept, you should have a feed of data. People should be able to use your product and data should start to flow in. And typically what you're going to get is identify, track, group identify. So the list that you see on the left. And if you think about this, the flywheel that Stuart mentioned a bit earlier, what we just did is we tick the middle box. The usage data is being generated now. It's been collected in your product. The kind of information you want to collect on people and the kind of actions you want to track about people, this is like an ongoing journey. You will iterate around it. So we're not going to go through that journey together, but at least you know the foundation and you know that you know how to collect this basic information. And now we're going to see how to pass it forward.
Yeah, so as Enzo mentioned, now that you're tracking that data in Segment and in June or however you're sort of capturing that data in your product, now I want to talk about how do you make that data accessible in HubSpot. We're actually going to sort of skip a step and then come back. But the thing to call out here, which Enzo really mentioned with that group call, which is sort of to translate that to a HubSpot concept, is that you're going to map account level data to companies in HubSpot most likely, and user level data, so what are the individual people doing, to contact level data, and then you can make the association between the two, which is essentially going to be your identify and your group calls. But the thing that you also have the option to do in HubSpot, which is sort of a little different than maybe how you're tracking people just directly in your product, is you also have other objects in HubSpot like deals and tickets. So if you're working a particular sales deal, or let's say it's an upsell deal, you might want to have some information on that deal, which is accessible to your sales team or whoever is interacting with that company in your CRM directly on the deal. In that case, you might want to be copying over or associating that data with the specific object that your team is interacting with. Because ultimately the goal of capturing all this product usage data and moving it to HubSpot is to make it useful to and sort of actionable to the teams that are using it and interacting with customers inside of HubSpot. So you can copy data between objects in a workflow. Whenever data changes in one object, you can just trigger that workflow and update it in another. We'll share sort of how to do that step by step after this, but just wanted to call out that the data that you capture in your product can be used sort of however you want and flexibly based on how your team is interacting or wants to interact with that data inside of HubSpot. So I'm going to pass back to Enzo for sort of the options on how do you actually make that jump from the data that's in your product and the data that is in HubSpot.
Thank you, Stuart. So there are 4 ways to connect your product analytics data to your CRM, to HubSpot. The first way is what we call the first class integration. So it's just about basically using the app that you're using and getting value from and checking if they have a direct integration with HubSpot. The pros is that it's quite easy. Usually there is an integration. You can just install the app. Usually it's pretty built for purpose. The cons is that it's only limited to that tool. The second option are called reverse ETLs. Reverse ETLs have really popped up in the last years, and they're a way to connect your data warehouse back to your CRM. So this is a great solution if you store all your data in a database or a data warehouse, and it's very flexible because you can edit it with SQL. The cons is that it requires the involvement of a data person, and it means buying another tool, so it can be more pricey. There are a couple of more legacy tools that do that, such as Zapier and Stitch. Well, they are quite easy to set up. The problem is that there are very few of them that are meant to process big amount of data. So as soon as you have lots of users in your app or accounts, and the same in your CRM, it's going to be a lot of volume and it's going to be quite expensive. The last one is in-house, which is usually the preferred solution for larger companies, enterprise. It's very cheap, it's extremely flexible, but it's quite resource intensive. It's not surprising to see a whole team handling that and managing that over time. So most realistically, the two first options are the most approachable for startups. Reverse ETLs are getting easier, so they may be a good solution for you. If you're the data team, they're definitely very interesting. And first-class integration, if they exist, could be great. And here we dropped shamelessly the logos of our companies because, of course, we're very big fans of HubSpot and have built companies that integrate directly with them.
Yeah, for sure. I think one thing to call out there on the first class integrations, obviously June is a little different than Arrows in the sense that June is plugged into your core product data, whereas Arrows is sort of creating almost new product data and syncing that for a specific part of the customer journey or specific interactions with an Arrows sort of collaborative plan and adding that to HubSpot. So that's something that when it comes to first-class integrations, as Enzo mentioned, they are going to be sort of potentially very specific to the lifecycle stage where customers are interacting with that tool. But the next thing that we're going to talk about, and we're going to sort of really get into the lifecycle that we mentioned earlier, the lifecycle stages and the different applications of product usage data. So the first one, which we're going to talk about, is activation. This is obviously one that we talk about a lot at Arrows. So it comes very in line with onboarding and helping folks get up and running and start seeing value from your product. We're going to talk about a couple of different sort of ways that you might be approaching activation. First, we have high touch, where you have sort of a human in the loop. You're very hands-on with customers. Maybe you're calling it a white glove or concierge type experience. And then we have low touch experiences where you might be trying to activate customers as well. We're going to talk about applications of product data for both of those things. So first we have high touch. And when you're trying to activate folks in a high touch way, this is where the ability to have data that's available in real time or available in sort of close to real time about what customers are doing and the interactions that they're having inside of your CRM is really valuable, because as soon as you have humans in the loop in that experience and you're trying to build a relationship, take the actions that are appropriate and manual to help drive that customer towards activation, having that data accessible is important. So sort of a few types of data that you might be using inside of your CRM, inside of HubSpot, to drive activation in a high touch way. So first we have product data. So maybe you're pulling that in from an integration like June. And then you might be pulling in things like which features are these customers using, or is this specific customer using? Have they started using the reporting tool or the reporting feature that you talked about in a previous call? Or have they started integrating the tool that you talked about setting up that's critical for them to get up and running with your product? And ideally, you're able to map what are the features that you need to onboard or help people understand how to use first, both in the data, but then also sort of validate that they are actually using those in the data. The other thing that, when it comes to product data for activation, that we often see is often used as sort of a measure of activation or a metric for success in onboarding, is how much of, I've called it account consumption here, which is essentially a measure of how much somebody has bought, are they actually using? So this might be a number of seats. It might be, if you have usage-based or sort of volume pricing tiers, like how much of that tier of value, for lack of a better term, are they using? Let's say that you are an email tool and you need people have paid to send 1,000 emails. Have they sent 10 emails, or have they sent 990, which could be means they're probably well on their way. They're already activated. They're well on their way to being successful with the product. Next, we have onboarding plan data. This is obviously pretty Arrow specific and sort of one of those first class integrations with HubSpot. So if you have a collaborative onboarding plan that you're putting in front of customers, being able to track the progress that customers are making through that plan inside of HubSpot is really helpful. And the thing that's important to differentiate from product data here is that product data might tell the story of how they're using the product. It doesn't necessarily tell the full story of how much they're making progress or how they're making progress towards the outcomes that they want to achieve, which is where having that sort of collaborative plan where you can make sure that you're tracking towards a shared goal can be really impactful. And then the other things here are not necessarily directly product data, but are going to be things that are tracked inside of your CRM and things that are in combination with the product data or the onboarding plan data are going to be really helpful to help inform the team on what to work on, what the context of this account is, and what the next step should be. So what is the context that we have from other teams' interactions with a customer? Maybe you have a sales to success handoff, which we've talked about in a previous workshop, and the details from sales are going to be used and impactful in helping drive a customer to activate, and then we can take the next appropriate step based on that. Or if we're capturing satisfaction at different points in the journey, maybe we're prioritizing different accounts, or accounts are getting are put on a different plan based on their experience so far, and where we need to sort of catch up or give them some extra attention to make sure that they are on the path and staying on the path to activate successfully. And this is where we'll include this after this workshop, but we have some workflows, some reporting, and some ways you can sort of tactically apply product data in HubSpot workflows to help achieve some of this and help make your team a little more proactive by leveraging the data to activate customers. So that said, I'll hand over to Enzo for the sort of next option, depending on, and maybe you have both high touch and low touch activation experiences, but Enzo, take it away.
Yeah, no, that was a great overview. So the way I think about low touch, high touch is, as Stuart said, you want to really dedicate some manual time to support your customers, either because they're very strategic, or because you're more sales led, or they represent a big revenue potential for you. In a low touch environment, you want to basically take some action more based on the average usage, right? Like you want to put everyone in a bucket and take some more or less automated action, right? So one thing that comes a lot for B2B SaaS is what people call activation milestones or checkpoints, which is also what was referred in the previous slide. And the idea is that there are some critical steps that usually accounts have to take to be successful. The first one is, of course, signing up. Usually there is a setup moment, and then there is something around the usage of your product. So something called the magic number comes a lot, which is the number of times accounts need to take an action within a specific amount of time to be successful. And the reason why it works so well is because usually products have a core feature or a set of core features. And usually time is pretty critical for any businesses that wants to adapt a new product, right? So something around like, they've been using your core features like 10 times the first week could be like a great magic number for you. And then usually there is this next phase, which is more about graduating into becoming a pro user, a power user. And usually here you have a couple of more advanced features that you can bucket. So what does it mean? It means that you can use tools to bucket people based on the steps they're at. You can bucket work accounts, so companies, and you can write on these companies the step they're at, and you can pass this information to HubSpot. So the way we usually recommend to do that is to pass a property on the account and then sync that property between your product analytics and your CRM. And then you can take all kind of automations you want in your CRM. So here, the trigger would be that an account has not completed a milestone. And the action would be, for instance, to update the life cycle of an account. And then based on which life cycle an account is in, you could trigger some emails, for instance. So here the suggestion would be, if an account is blocked, put it in a column called offer manual support, and then offer some, a way to book a call with you because it's quite important. Moving to the next, I have another example of another low touch. The number of active seats is something that comes a lot. Usually when you have a B2B SaaS, you have a product where multiple users can sign up. And I would say 99% of the cases, if that's your situation, having multiple people using your product will increase the retention of the account on your product. So we see a lot of companies that will measure the total number of seats of the account and the total number of seats active in the last 7, 14, or 30 days. And then based on that, they will take an action. So here, a very famous trigger we've seen is checking if the company has more than one seat, and if there is only one seat active, in which case, again, change the life cycle of the company, for instance, to a status like not expanding, and then send, for instance, a well-crafted email on the value of inviting your colleagues. So that's for the two examples that we see a lot at June, and that usually are pretty, I would say, pretty strong for people that are mostly started. So those of you who gave the 3 and the 4, you could get value from these two use cases.
Yeah, I think one thing that's important to know too is that obviously users is sort of one way in which you might be using the product data as triggers, but if it could be very sort of product specific too, right? If you're a project management tool, maybe it's projects that have been created, or if it's I give the email example earlier, maybe it's email sent. But this same sort of thing applies, right? Set a threshold if you have done that thing, or if you haven't reached the threshold, do one thing. If they have reached the threshold, do another. And one thing that I'm curious about here, and maybe this speaks more to the renewal and expansion use case that we'll get into, but how do you think about, is this a one-time thing that you're sort of looking at this if you reach this or you didn't, or you're looking at this over a rolling period when it comes to activation, or you only look at that later in the life cycle?
Right. I think there are many ways to look at it, but the way we look at it at June, at least, is by saying that the activation is the early phase of the account, because then it becomes quite confusing, how you can measure these things. And is there like a first-time activation and a recurring activation? Like, it becomes a bit messy. So we like to say that the activation is like the first 14, 30 days, and then it's more like the retention story that starts. What's your take on this one, Stuart? I'm curious.
Yeah, I think that totally makes sense. I think that it's just sort of important to note that there is activation to the product as a whole, but there's also sort of feature level activation or things like that. And I know that as a starting point, as we'll get to at the very end, starting small, tracking the data that you're actually going to take action on is sort of the first step here. But just important to note that there is there are multiple activation events and multiple things that you're going to want to take action on as you get sort of deeper into the life cycle, which we're going to talk about now. So using product data for retention, and we're going to go. We started with activation. We're going to do retention next, and then conversion at the end. But product usage data for retention, this maybe gets into your ongoing success motion, your renewals, things that are coming. You have a user who is, or an account that is successfully up and running, and they're sort of moving through their life cycle. And again, we're going to break this down into both high touch and low touch sort of approaches to using this data. So things that, again, you might want to be looking at for in a high touch way, if you are doing active renewal planning, if you have, you have a renewal date, maybe it's annual, maybe it's quarterly, whatever your renewal cycles are. But if you have an account that you have a renewal coming up for, and you want to start planning for that, you can use that product data inside of HubSpot to start looking for accounts that might be at risk, accounts that might need a different action plan or a different set of actions to be taken depending on their usage. So we mentioned earlier, you might be measuring activation by their sort of consumption of account and reaching a critical threshold. When it comes to renewal planning, you might be looking for accounts that are below a certain threshold of of usage or of consumption to start splitting out. This is the, we need to get this account back on the sort of successful path, or this is an account that is looking like they're using the product to achieve their outcomes. They're using the product consistently. They're hitting the sort of milestones that we expect in terms of usage. And maybe we're looking to expand that account, or we're looking to we're applying a different playbook to an account that is in that sort of motion. And having that inside the CRM, of course, gives your success and your account teams the advantage of not having to go look for that data. It can be surfaced, as we mentioned earlier, surfaced on the renewal deal, or if you're splitting deals that are specific to each stage of the life cycle, you can put the data on the specific record that they're going to be looking at. Or maybe you could also just be looking at that at the company level. Is always going to be a good place to reference for account level data as well. Maybe you can also, as you're doing renewal planning, there's the opportunity to, if you're syncing in user level data, maybe you're able to identify new champions, or identify who are the people who are going to be most helpful in assisting push that renewal conversation forwards. If you can identify if there are some users that are more active or consuming more of the product than others. And the advantage, again, of having your product usage data in HubSpot as opposed to just in a product analytics tool is that it makes it much easier to combine the product data with the other data that you're collecting across the journey. So that might be things like CSM Pulse, sort of broadly categorizing, what is the perception that a CSM has of this account. You might be explicitly surveying your CSMs after customer interactions. What is their take on the health and sort of likelihood to renew of this account? They should also have a sort of more qualitative view of like, what is this customer trying to achieve, and are they getting there? And you can sort of line that up with the product data to get a complete picture of the account. You can also, of course, be asking customers early, and this, I know we're not talking going to go super deep on renewal strategy here, but asking customers if they intend to renew early is, of course, a good strategy, as opposed to waiting until the renewal comes up. I know Sherelle's in the chat here always likes to say, do as much as you can to make renewals a non-event by getting ahead of them and handling them early on. And then, of course, we can use HubSpot workflows. We can use HubSpot playbooks. We could use if you're using a collaborative arrows plan, you could have a different template for running renewals. I'm just going to show you a really quick example here of what a playbook that is based on product usage data might look like. So you might be identifying whether an account is active or if they have engagement, and then taking very different approaches based on their level of engagement. And the nice thing about breaking everything out in a workflow, and we'll include this workflow in a walkthrough after this workshop as well. But the nice thing about breaking things out in a workflow, and you could also do this by triggering a playbook in HubSpot. But the nice thing about doing this is you're sort of defining the process up front and letting the data dictate, this is what we're going to present to our team, so that they don't have to be guessing or spend the time figuring out what to do. They can follow the appropriate playbook based on what the customer is doing. So that's sort of high touch, and that's really the core concept there, is like, how do you combine all of the data that you have to give a complete picture of an account when you're thinking about renewals, and then how do you leverage the data in HubSpot to help your team be more proactive in sort of executing the playbooks that you have.
Lovely, so powerful. It looks great.
Oh.
Right. Okay. So I think you mentioned that already. I'll just say it again in 10 sec. Basically, you can make sure that accounts that are disengaged get re-engaged, or you can trigger some kind of customer success initiative based on their average usage. So it's very common to actually check if there is a decrease of the usage of the app or a decrease of the seats of the apps. And then if the threshold is above a specific number, take some follow-up actions. Something that I haven't mentioned is how do you get this data in, like the average usage and so on. Some tools will get you that out of the box. It's something that we do at June. You can also do that with a cron jobs. A cron job is something that you usually would run at midnight or something like that once a day. We'll go through your data, your code base, and based on some input, do a pre-computation in your code, and then pass that on the user, on the account, or whatever object you want to use that Stuart has introduced earlier on. So there is it's sometimes fully automated and you can rely on them. Sometimes it's also the case with what Arrows is doing with the onboarding plan data. Sometimes it's going to be an extra effort from one of your engineers to actually put that into place. Right. So moving on, back to you, Stuart.
Yeah. So the final sort of stage of the life cycle that we're going to talk about is conversion. So we have activation, retention, a conversion. Something that applies across the customer journey. You of course have initial sale. You have initial sort of becoming a paid customer if you're in a more PLG motion, moving from self-serve to paid. But you can look at the signals that you might use to sort of drive actions, drive the things you're going to do to sort of increase that conversion. I know the way that this is going to be, I know, Enzo, you talk about this, or we talked about this previously, like depending on the motion that you have, this is going to be very different based on each company.
Correct. So these are few of the signals that we see all the time. The usage limit, if you have a usage-based pricing, if people are going to reach a limit of usage on your free plan, you can capture that, and you know that an account is going to be ready to be sold, upsold, based on this usage. For instance, you give away 1,000 free emails and the person has reached 800 or 900. Maybe there are some criteria, that really qualifies an account to use one of your paid plan, and they will get more value from one of your paid plans. So you could trigger some automation based on that. Like, we figure out that you are, a customer that is a B2B SaaS. We have this feature which is amazing for the B2B SaaS. You should totally give it a shot. And the last one is actually a very basic one, but that people sometimes overlook, which is very strong, is whether or not people interact with your paywall features. Usually it's a very good signal that they could be interested in that specific feature. And so sending out, again, some communication to say, you seem interested in that feature, we can give you a trial or something like that, can be extremely successful.
Yeah, I really like that one. I mean, that's something that we introduced relatively recently at Arrows, and something that is definitely a really high intent if people are interacting with a feature, or even if you are feature gating things, like who are the people who are, if you have an intro video, or if you have a sort of a gated demo or something like that, like if you actually have to go talk to sales to unlock something, who are the people, and how do you surface that as early as possible to your team so that they can be proactive about, I guess it's reactive, but you can be very on top of making sure that you're making sure those people get what they need to convert. And then the final thing here, and we can get into questions and everything that's and we can sort of talk specifically around any of these points that we've got into if anybody wants to go deeper. But the last thing here, and sort of always a good note, I think, Enzo, you said this at the very beginning when it comes to the data and the sort of specific data that you're tracking, but how do you iterate on the starting point? And this is something that I think applies to just about everything, especially at startups or at the earlier stage companies, is start with less and make sure that you're actually using it and you understand why you added the data that you did. And so on this one, are there specific, and thinking probably specifically for track events, is there anything that you would always recommend folks track or try to move to the CRM, or is it just too business specific to to generalize?
Yeah, I mean, I think the login is pretty something you always want to capture, and you can already go pretty far, you know. With the login, you will understand if people are coming back, so if the account is active. And you can assume that if people come back, they're probably getting value out of your product. So I would say having a very accurate logging event, probably trigger from the backend so that ad blockers or some modern web browsers don't block. I think that's probably a really good start. And then maybe attaching the average usage for an account, just doing the sum of everything that you may have, any event you may have, and just putting that on the account. I think that's pretty a very good start. Already with that, you're on the way to understand how to do product analytics and CRMs together.
Yeah, I think it's a great way of putting it. I know to give an arrows example of what we do with our own product data, uh, we track the number of plans that an account is creating. That's also the way that pricing works, but it wouldn't necessarily have to be that way. But we track the number of plans that accounts are creating, and then we also track we have sort of a separate or sort of a nuanced version of that, which is the number of engaged plans which an account has, which essentially is the plans that have been created versus the plans that have had activity to a certain level, which really gives the sort of it's easy, or it's one thing to create the plan, but the engaged plan is sort of a better measure of you getting value from the product and you actually using it because Arrows works with your customers' customers, or our customers' customers, if that makes sense. Then we can sort of look at the difference between those two. And I think it's really one thing that's always sort of surprising to me is how far you can go. So to your point, with the login data, how far you can go with relatively few sort of very focused pieces of data that you're tracking. And the last two here are sort of very related, right? The first is understanding your own baseline. Like, what does the usage look like for a successful account? If this is your highest MRR or highest value account, what does the usage look like for an account that is at that level? What does the usage look like for an account that is consistently giving you really high satisfaction scores, for example? Sort of figure out what good looks like, and then that gives you a really good place to iterate against and figure out sort of what is the gap between the things that accounts that are really successful are doing, and what are the things that accounts that are not successful and not reaching that level are either maybe they're doing something different or they're just not doing enough of the things that they are currently doing. How do you think about that, Enzo, from the perspective of you have now you've sort of gone through these steps, you have product usage data that you're tracking, you have product usage data that is making its way into to HubSpot. How do you sort of think about that data or using that data over time? Like, once you've got it in, that's sort of the starting point, but like how do you think about iterating that?
Yeah, no, that's a great one. I think it's never set in stone, as you said. Like, I think you get started with probably like tracking a few things, and then you understand what's the trigger to kind of being successful. And in the early days, your product is fairly simple, right? So there are maybe like 2, 3 main reasons to activate in your product, right? And then you start building a lot more and more and more and more, and then you start to have this very, yeah, broad set of data. And I think what we've seen a lot is companies that start to verticalize or silo their activation per use case, right? So I'll talk about the company I work for, Intercom. Intercom has like 3 main reasons to use the product. One is customer success, so they have a chat and an inbox product for that. One is actually sales. When you go on a website, they can pop up the chat based on some enriched information. And you can also do some outbound emails if you want. And then they have marketing, right? You can do all sorts of automation. And so for them, when you go in the product, you might activate on marketing or success, or two of them, and it might be success first and then marketing. There's just so many journeys, right? So I think that's the way I think about this one. Your product is going to be small, and then it's going to expand, and then over time, people might activate on very different things. And so what you always want to do is maybe every 3 months or 6 months, kind of challenge the way you've been measuring things, kind of challenge the what it means to be successful with your product, and make sure that this always map between your product teams and the teams that live in your CRM, because overall what you want to do and make sure is that these teams are very well aligned and share common objective and common tools and understanding to achieve these goals, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's a great point, that alignment is key. And you have to, I think it's not too tricky to see that it's much easier to do that if everybody is looking at the same data, right? If everybody has access to the same insights, the same data at the account level. And I guess this sort of brings up another question. Feel free to get everybody in the chat, everybody who's joining us. If you have questions, drop them in the chat. We certainly have some time at this point to get into those. But how do you think about that sort of individual account data versus the sort of aggregate or like average data that you're tracking? Who is sort of which kind of data? Is there a difference between this data is most valuable for the product team, this type of data is most valuable for the customer success team? Like, how would you think about that sort of breakdown?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So something that we see is that it seems that people start with usage level data, user level data. They start by trying to understand how user is doing and so on. And at some point, when they have a multiplayer product, when they have a product with multiple people, it seems that for B2B SaaS, they're mostly switching to the account level. That's what we're seeing. And the reason is really commercial. When you ask, a B2B SaaS whether they're selling to companies or to users, they will almost always tell you it's to companies. The user might leave. There's, some, turnover in the company. You might want to expand to another department, to another team. It's really about the company. So we see mostly people trying to understand the activation, the retention, and the conversion of the accounts. This being said, an account is the sum of the users, right? And so you can also get a really good proxy by just understanding the usage of a single person and trying to understand who is the person driving the activation. Like, that's a very important information, right? Is it the product manager? Is it the success person? Is it some onboarding specialist, maybe for arrows, stuff like that. So it's a bit of a schizophrenic exercise where you want to zoom out and look at companies level data usually, but somehow you still want to get this user level data and be able to zoom in, right? And I'm talking for B2Bs right now, mostly. If you talk about B2Cs, like, they will not look at that company level data. There is none. Though one caveat here is that you can still group users into other entities that companies. This is a bit more advanced, but you can group people by interest or whatever communities they are in, and that might also give you some valuable insight.
Yeah, that
Are
totally
you
makes sense.
are you seeing the same as Stuart, or what's the preferred level for you guys?
Yeah, I think that certainly tracks. I think that especially when you're talking about renewals or things that are when you have a human in the loop, typically they are higher value, higher ACV companies that are that you're looking to drive interaction with. So that certainly tracks there. I think that you also make a great point there, that being able to get specific about who is the user who is taking the action, and sort of breaking that down by, maybe it's by role, maybe it's by, by company size, whatever it is, however you're segmenting your customers. If you can break out specific repeatable patterns, you can go and sort of build a playbook around that. So we have a great question here from Louise, like, what about SaaS companies that are not startups? I know we've talked pretty specifically, or at least we've mentioned startups a few times here. But how does this sort of data, product usage data, apply beyond smaller startups versus enterprise or larger orgs?
Right. I think that's pretty more your field. I mean, I'm happy to give my answer, but I'd love to hear yours. And again, I can't get enough of these animations. They look great. I really need to try this tool next time.
That's too funny. I think Max is here from from Contrast. But yeah, so this is a great question. I think that uh, the sort of specificity or the way we've talked about this for startups, I think is helpful. But also the data itself is definitely very applicable to larger companies. Just the way that you're using it is going to be a little different. Maybe you don't have so much of a product led motion. Maybe you are more higher touch. You have a dedicated success manager for each account. Maybe you have a dedicated account manager. But the way, and this is really the power of bringing this product usage data into your CRM, is that you can much more proactively identify the accounts that need assistance, the accounts that are meeting certain usage limits, the accounts that are dropping below certain thresholds, and then drive the playbooks or sort of trigger the playbooks that you want your teams to run based on that data, which sort of solves a couple of problems. Like having a playbook for specific situations is incredibly helpful in driving efficiency for the team, but also having that data in the CRM means that the team doesn't have to spend their time, which could be spent with customers, going and finding that data, right? Maybe they don't have that data at all and they're just sort of guessing or asking the customer what their usage has been, which is just sort of a really tricky and time-consuming task to undertake. Or maybe they do have access to that data, but it is very siloed from where they're already working. And as we mentioned, the rest of the data which is available, in the CRM, you have data from your sales team, you have data from your account team, all the teams that are interacting with the customer in one place, and sort of having it there is really impactful for bigger orgs, and probably more so in terms of those higher touch orgs. You want to focus on the very specific data points that those teams are going to use to drive their playbooks with customers.
Yeah, something maybe worth mentioning is that for larger enterprises, the data stack becomes more hairy, more complex, more intertwined. And so they tend to have CRM engineers, sales engineers, like people that actually do the things we've been discussing, but it's their full-time job. And in fairness, these companies sometimes need that because, the way the data is put together, the way it's stored, usually in a warehouse at scale, becomes very, very complex. There's also some usually challenges with the taxonomy, making sure that the definition of something is very clear. Like I mentioned, being a seed being active in the last 14 days. What does active mean, right? It can mean a lot of different things, right? And so if you want to empower your sales team or your success team with that data point, you really need to make sure that it's super clear what it means, right? And so they start to have like tools to document that, and it's very exponential. It becomes really, really crazy at scale. And I think what's exciting is that a lot of things we've been mentioning today, I think that top companies have been doing for many years, and now it's kind of like cascading down to the startup market, which means that a lot of startups can actually adopt these best practices, which, honestly, some of these practices are just better than what a lot of enterprises do, just because, again, they have to handle so much complexity, right? Whereas it might be like 2-click integration for someone just getting started with this topic. So there is some good and some bad at the top.
Yeah, for sure. That totally makes sense. I'm just diving into HubSpot a little bit here. I can share my my screen and we can show a couple of things that you might want to do with product usage data inside of HubSpot. So I'm actually going to go to this customer health dashboard, which is one place in a health score. This is a whole separate topic which we could rabbit hole on. But one way which you might want to use product usage data inside of HubSpot is to generate some kind of health score. As I mentioned, separate topic, but being able to, here we have a product usage score, which in this case is sort of made up of a couple of things of account consumption. We have a consumption percentage which we're tracking based on which we're calculating based on product usage data being synced in about what a customer has bought and then what they are actually using. So that can contribute to the score, which ultimately gives you sort of an overview of account health, which you can then use. If I go to companies here, you can then use to sort of break companies out in HubSpot. So you can put all of your, if they have a red health score, for example, and health score being used sort of very generically here. If you have this health score could be calculated however you want, but product usage data is almost certainly going to be something that you would want to include in that health score if you have a product that people are interacting with. So you can break accounts out that are at risk. We also are breaking out accounts here based on renewal date here. And then you can, this is sort of where having this data in HubSpot in combination with other data gets really powerful, because you can start to see, well, these dates are a little off, but these accounts maybe need less attention than these 4 accounts at the bottom, which have upcoming renewals but are not in as healthy a state. And again, defining health however you however you want to.
There is a great way to be iterative on that. Something that someone shared with us a while ago. Basically, when you have your green light health scores, like the one that are shown here, it's never going to be perfect. Like, you never know if it's the perfect way to measure things, but it doesn't really matter. What you can do is get started with your first green light. And then if a customer churns, then figure out if they were in the red bucket. And if not, which bucket they were in. And then you probably want to readjust your bucket because, yeah, that was a customer at risk of churn. And this way, usually you can get started very quickly, and then you can iterate and improve this system.
For sure. And I think that, well, that's a great question, Natalie. That will certainly be shared. I will include that link afterwards, which is a great segue to what's next. So we only have a couple of minutes here, and I know we will certainly send out everything that we've seen in terms of, or everything that we've talked about in terms of the workflows that you can use, the reporting that you can use with product usage data in HubSpot. You'll get that along with the recording. There'll be a walkthrough video of each workflow. But I want to thank everybody so much for joining. Thank you, Enzo, for joining. If you have any questions, if there's anything that you think of sort of after the session, anything that you would like more detail on, let us know. And we will, certainly answer those one-on-one, or we'll, try to include those in the follow-up as well. But Enzo, what should folks go to, if they're interested in using June or taking a look at June, what should they go to learn more and check it out?
Yeah, thanks so much. I just shared my LinkedIn. I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn, so they can connect with me there. And then June is June.so. It's pretty easy, so they can also check it out. Thanks so much, Stuart.
Yeah, of course. And if anybody is interested on the Arrow side, collaborative onboarding plans, again, as we mentioned, with that sort of direct HubSpot integration and push data in there. Also, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Also, pretty active there as well, with lots of HubSpot content. Or check out Arrows at arrows.to. Similar to June, not it's a nice, fun domain name. But yeah, thank you everybody so much for joining us. We'll hang out here in the chat for a little bit. So if you have any questions, let us know there. But thank you so much.
Thanks for joining, folks. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Enzo. All right. I'll hang out here for just a second. Daniel, are you still around? I know you've been in the chat this whole time.
Let me turn on my video. Yeah, no, that was great. Thank you, guys. It was awesome to see the HubSpot workflows at the end too, and some of the dashboards. I think it's nice for people to be able to see how it all clicks together, how it fits together.
Sure.
June, people should go check out the integration with HubSpot there. It's really cool to be able to very easily with just a couple clicks sync in that data. That's a lot more complicated. We use high touch at Arrows. And so, we get more control over maybe the specifics of the data or some of the queries, but at the same time, it takes a lot more work and a lot more consideration for how we get that data into those properties inside HubSpot. But as everybody saw, like, you can do such cool stuff once you have it in there. So
yeah, I think it's really that combination of sort of being able to combine product data with everything else that you already have in HubSpot is super powerful and is really helpful in sort of workflow triggers and using product data the same way you would use any other data you already have in HubSpot.
Absolutely. Well, thanks everybody. It looks like people are heading out, so maybe let's end it. Let's wrap it up.
See you, everyone.
Thanks, Enzo.
Good to see you,
Great to see you,
Daniel.
man.
Thanks for having me.